I didn't make much money the last 2 years, going from the highs of crypto to doing no other paid work. I explicitly said, like, I'm not doing any freelance stuff. I'm not launching any courses. I'm not going to try to make money in some other way because that's going to be a distraction from the long-term game. And that's a really, really hard mindset shift to make, especially for me, who's had these short-term wins along the way. But I think that long-term, it pays off so much better. You get that really incredible compound interest of focusing on something for a long time. And that's just where so much more of my energy is going now. It's just like very long-term games with long-term people and not trying to play these like quick win ones anymore.
Nat, welcome to the Lewis and Kyle show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having me on. Excited to chat.
So Nat, this is, we purposefully are surprising you with this. This is actually the last episode of the Lewis and Kyle show.
Really?
The last interview. We've been doing it for 4 years. And when we started it, we were obsessed with you. We were obsessed with your writing.
No way.
We treated your blog like it was gospel. And you were the one person that we wanted to interview the entire time that we were podcasting, to the point where it became a meme for us, where it was
Are you serious?
No, I know. Yeah, this is crazy.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
Where it was like, when we interview him, we can be done. And
so then we were just putting off ever reaching out at that point because we're like, what are we going to do?
And
that's hilarious.
This is the last episode. And Lewis and I agreed to sell the podcast to Lewis's company, and it's going to be a different thing moving forward. It'll be great. Everything's ending amiably. But the moment that I signed the contract was the moment that you sent him a DM to do this podcast.
That's so funny.
So it's really full circle. And I don't know, Lewis, if you got anything else you want to add there, but the serendipity and the coincidence is unreal with this episode.
That's incredible. I love that so much. Talk about those weird little alignment in the universe things happening. This is really special then. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to chat.
There's probably, I didn't find the specific examples on air where like, I know we've made the reference of the joke. I know we talked about it with Danny Miranda a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Like cool. That was kind of our end game, was like, one day we're going to interview Nat Eliason. And he's like, okay, well, you could probably reach out to him now. Like you've had a lot of really similar types of people. And we're like, no, when that's over, we just won't. It's kind of like the problem of achieving your goal.
We're like, we can't reach out to him.
I'm not going to have an identity anymore. So
that's so funny.
It just Kyle signs the DocuSign and I was like, sweet. And then you sent me a DM. I'm like, you would not believe what just happened. So
that's incredible.
It was.
I'm so happy.
Insane.
So the channel, the RSS feed, all of this is staying alive. It's just going under a rebrand as part of, it'll be Orbit Radio, because I have kind of a couple agencies. Orbit Metrics Analytics Consulting and Orbit Marketing does content production as a service. And so this is going to just be kind of the front end for all of that. But the YouTube channel has the subscribers and the authority, and really all of these interviews really do revolve around content, marketing, business, entrepreneurship. And it just made more sense to keep the train running. But
yeah,
bombshell.
But for me, Nat, it started and it ended. It's ending with you. So
that's incredible. All right, I'm honored.
We're pumped. Yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah, we both love the book. We mentioned that. We're here specifically what catalyzed you from being kind of a name on a list of people we'd love to have on the show to you suddenly ended up on our show happens to be the book, Crypto Confidential. I had mentioned to you as well that I worked in the industry kind of in that same period of time. So it was a wild frenzy. Kyle and I were interviewing people all through the ups and downs and the mania. And it was a wild time. You gave an awesome tell-all, and there's a lot I want to break down from the story. I'm most interested in starting out with the psychological aspects, because I feel like everyone kind of resonates with different things, right? I'm single, I don't have any kids, so the parenting thing, I was like, I'll relate to that in the future at some point maybe. But the whole part was the addictive tendencies, the obsessiveness, and like the dark psychological aspects. Yeah. I'm curious if you have, even kind of now, what you've practically applied or thought through to not slip into a dark hole like that again, or even, and you can kind of give some color as to what it was like as well, kind of at the bottom, because a lot of people just, it's all consuming.
Yeah. And that I felt like was a really important thing to try to capture, because if it was just a book of the highs and all the trades, that went great or something like you mostly see on Twitter, that wouldn't be a really honest retelling of the experience. And one of my favorite things that I hear from people who weren't in crypto back then, but saw it from the outside, who then read the book, is they'll say, I had a lot of FOMO for the people like you who were super in that world doing all of this stuff. And after reading your book, I don't feel that much FOMO anymore. Like the psychological cost seems like it was pretty high. And, maybe some people have a better or are more able to disconnect and not be completely consumed by it. But I've always had a very addictive personality in sort of everything from video games to entrepreneurship stuff to obviously being in the crypto world. And it really was all consuming. It was the only thing I could think about. It was the only thing I wanted to talk about. I was going to the bathroom more often than I needed to just so I could check prices on my phone. And it felt like all of my sense of happiness, or, like self-worth is maybe too strong of a word, but so much of my emotions were tied to like price movements for that period. And it was really crazy how quickly it went from, this is a fun thing that we're figuring out and we're just like getting into, and I'm doing it with my friend at his cafe, to like, oh no, this is like our whole potential financial future could be on the line here. If we make the right more couple trades, we could just be like done with money forever. And then all of the like fighting with, like fighting and struggles with my wife that came from that, and like me being totally consumed in this world. And, to answer the question of like not getting back in that place, because it was a pretty like dark and challenging place. I had to cut this from the book, but I had started going to therapy because of how tough all the crypto stuff was. And that like the only way that I know that I can prevent that from happening again is to just not let myself touch anything like this. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the trading apps on my phone. I don't have a wallet on my phone. I have just my long-term hold stuff that I feel good about not touching for 5 or 10 years or however long. And I just try to stay a little bit informed, but not in the thick of it, because I just like, I don't have good moderation. It's just like not part of my personality.
From velocity to staring at yourself in the mirror, drunk or hungover, and questioning your sanity. Yeah. I mean, the book really drew that line for me. I'm curious as to whether or not you have used that same addictive nature, and it sounds like you went to therapy and got help for it, but do you feel that same way, that same fog with writing this book and the release of this book?
I've definitely been able to channel that degree of focus into writing over the last 2 years. And the nice thing with that is that it's almost all internally driven, right? It's you're sitting down and you're making something, and I have to constantly work on my relationship with the work that I do, because I'm like very self-critical and very hard on myself for the quality of my work. And that can be good for getting better, but it also gets to a point where you're just like being kind of needlessly self-critical. And so there's a balance there. But the nice thing with channeling that obsessiveness into a creative work is that even if the book doesn't do insanely well, and I think it's going to do well, it's hard to be objective about your own work, but I think it's a pretty good book. And I think it has the potential to do well. But even if it doesn't, I'll still feel good about it, because one, I worked really hard on it. I spent most of the last 2 years just trying to get better at writing to make the book better. I know there are going to be a bunch more books in the future, and I'm going to hopefully keep getting better. And so it's kind of a win either way. Like my happiness isn't tied to the financial outcome of it. Whereas, with crypto trading, with speculating, your entire success measure is whether or not you make money off of that thing, which is ultimately not really in your control. You can try to make the right decisions, but you can't control the market. And so I think that if you have that obsessive personality, you've got to find a way to channel it into something where you can win no matter what, or else it can kind of destroy you.
I think one aspect that you had mentioned earlier, Kyle and I had just said this at the beginning of the episode, is that from the outside looking in, like myself and Kyle always, of course, on Twitter only saw the parts where it's like you sold the ape at the perfect time. And like, of course, kind of like, we always read your newsletter and felt like we were consistently ahead on a lot of trends just by reading your work. Like, was kind of how we felt over the years on like the no shampoo thing and the ancestral diet, and maybe just those things were more popular. And you were like our one kind of like, in college, we're kind of stuck in that local environment, and maybe like everyone online was saying those things, but a lot of our exposure to the world, especially since we were off social media for a long time, or at least I was like through the proxy of your newsletter. And I think it's very sobering because a lot of people, we saw that and we're like, there's just not just in terms of being self-critical of your own work, but also comparing yourself to other people that are, again, most of your followers haven't had a face-to-face interaction with you. And they only, you did tweet about several things going wrong, but that's not obviously what sticks in our memory. And for this book, I think for a lot of people, whether or not it's specifically your audience or people just in general that see you as an author tell the true lows that you experienced, there's not even, it's just a constant reminder for people that these shortcut type ways to make it in life are like, it's just not that desirable.
Yeah. And it's never as good as it seems from the outside. And this was something that I've learned a couple of times with making passive income, right? Where you can spin something up and it can make you a passive income, but the minute you start treating it as passive income, it starts dying. And in a year or 2 years of you not really putting the energy into it anymore, it's probably going to be gone. Somebody's going to have eaten your lunch. But those first 3 to 6 months of you, partying in Bali and just having money show up in your bank account and you're tweeting and posting on Instagram, everybody from the outside is going like, oh my God, that looks incredible. And they're imagining in their head that you're going to have that forever. But that's often this very temporary thing. And it kind of goes down quickly, and then you're kind of back to where you started. And it was the same thing with crypto, where I sold the ape at the very top. I made almost 200 grand on that trade. And then 6 months later, I bought a crypto punk at near the top of the market, and I'm now down $200,000 on that trade. But that doesn't get talked about on Twitter as much, right? Like the losing the money that you left on the table is, sometimes you can do that as kind of an engagement bait, but people get excited about the wins, and that's what they want to see. And that type of story in particular was so common. I knew so many people who had these huge public wins, and then they rolled it into a bunch of other stuff and then ended up losing a lot of the money they made. And you don't see that side of it very much, right? Like people don't share that side. And so you've got to be pretty careful being on the outside looking into these things that seem like ways to get rich quickly or ways to beat the system, because sure, in a few select cases, people do actually pull something off and they get, a crazy 20-year passive income stream, or they make the $5 or $10 million and then they walk away. There was one story I had to cut from the book where one person rode something from the thousands of dollars up to the tens of millions, and then cashed out 10 million to cash and just quit Twitter, quit crypto, just left the space entirely, and said he was just going to go ski for a while. And I don't know if he ever got back in. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But that story was so rare, and it was much more common that people would have these wins, and then they keep playing the game, and the wins slowly get eaten away by less lucky decisions.
It was really interesting for me reading the book and having this picture of you in my mind as Lewis was describing, us sharing your medley and betting on when it would end, and just seeing you in this way, and then reading your writing as a normal person. And one thing that you said in the book that kind of shocked me was that when you got the job with CryptoCraft and you felt very accomplished, you said that it felt like it was the first time in your life where you felt proud of your work. And that kind of shocked me, because I've from my perspective of a reader of yours, you would have been proud of all of the things that you had accomplished prior to that. So what made you say that?
So if I'm remembering correctly, what I actually said was it was the first time I was doing a job that 13-year-old me would have been really excited to hear about. And what I meant by that was I was not a great student. I could hack it. I could get the B+, A-, because I think, this, whatever, you guys will forgive me for saying this, is like some of that stuff just came a little bit easier to me. And I was able to like, skirt the system, do the bare minimum and like do okay with it. And all I wanted to do was play video games. So I would, rush through my homework and then just play video games as much as humanly possible. And like got to college and was skipping classes to play video games. And it was just like, that's all I wanted to do. And it created a kind of challenging relationship with my parents because they like looked down on it, right? And they didn't make me feel particularly good for like that being the thing that I wanted to do. But that was what I got the most joy from. I didn't get much joy from school. And so to now suddenly be doing a job where I'm not only working on a video game, which is super cool, something that I had like thought maybe in another life it would have been cool if I'd gotten to work on a video game, but now I'm actually working on one and I'm making more money from that than I've ever made from anything in my life. It's just like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like 13-year-old me never could have imagined this. So I'm definitely very proud of like other work that I've done, and especially the writing. But 13, 16, I mean, heck, even 18-year-old me, if you had told him that, hey, you're actually going to be a full-time writer and be super fulfilled by it, I don't think he would have believed you, because that just wasn't on my radar at all. But the video games definitely were.
It's a more subtle point. Another part of the book that I think just is almost like therapeutic for a lot of people. Like, I don't know if you wrote the book for people in it or people outside, one or the other. I mean, it certainly serves both. For people who are like in it, to just hear another person like relive the both glory days and non-glory days, and for people on the outside to have like any clue what was going on. Even the whole like solidity thing, that was a big point, in terms of where I was in my life at that point. I graduated college in 2021. I got a computer science degree. I was interested in doing entrepreneurial things, so I didn't want to go just be a coder right out of school. And there was this kind of period over the summer of 2021 where I was like, should I just, try to start my own thing? Should I try to like be a Solidity developer? And that was a big source personally of like, I don't know if regret or just something that I felt like was a missed opportunity not going in that direction. To what extent do you think in the future of your career, I know you are working on your writing app now, which is very cool. And the whole other conversation that I feel like a lot of FOMO out still not being in a technical role, like I'm all sales and marketing for what I do, is like the pace of development with AI. Cause like I saw you whip that out, like it felt like not overnight, but so fast.
It was like 2 weeks.
It was crazy. To know the extent of your background. So what do you say about, what are some takeaways either on that or some forward-looking plans for that whole skill set being part of your career, being like a whole software engineer is kind of the side quest that was like it could have been the most interesting part of the book. But it just wasn't, but it's still a major thing to have happened.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been kind of interested in programming. I have a funny backstory with it because I went to Carnegie Mellon for college, which is a big engineering school, very CS focused. And everybody there has to take a CS course, which is kind of cool, right? Like a lot of colleges, you don't have to do that. And so I took the Intro to CS course and I hated it. I think I got a C in it. I just did not enjoy it at all. I was like, programming is awful. This is not fun. And then I got my first internship and we were doing all this manual work in Excel. And I started thinking that, okay, this is kind of dumb. Like, why are we doing the same thing over and over again? And so I taught myself Visual Basic during that internship to just automate what my team was doing in Excel. And I was like, oh, programming is cool because you get good at programming and you don't have to do the same thing with a computer multiple times. Like, that's a neat high leverage skill set. But I'd never really had a good opportunity to fully focus on it. I'd tinkered with it. I'd played with it for doing marketing things. And at the time in 2021, I was thinking, okay, I'm trying to start a new career. Programming is something I've always liked. And there's a faster route to making money with that than writing. I'm just going to go for it and see if I can figure it out. And that's how I ended up writing Solidity code and all of that. But where I am now, if I was never an incredible programmer, I don't think I would care very much. But if I was never an incredible writer, I would care a lot. And so that's definitely where I want to focus my energy. But what programming kind of fills in for me is the video game itch. It's kind of similar. You've got all of these, little quests that you go out and solve by building things and making things. And for me, I made the writing app prolific because it was so hard for me to switch from writing tweets and blog articles to writing books, because there was no public sense of progress. which is kind of like that shouldn't matter. You should be able to just like feel good about your work without anybody else knowing you're working. But from spending 10 years in the online world and getting to publish articles every week and tweets every day, like I was used to getting social proof for working. And now suddenly I'm just working alone in my office for months at a time. I just wanted a way to like publicly show that I was doing work. And so building the app was like, I turned in the book, I did the first draft of the sci-fi novel, I had some downtime, and I said, let's just see if I can do this with AI tools. And it was super easy and really fun. And where I am with it is I'm like, if nobody ever pays me for this app, I don't care. Like I don't want to focus on this as a business. I never want to have employees, but I want to keep making it better so that I can have it. And so that if there are other people out there who want to track their writing in a social setting, like they have it too. But it's never going to be something where I like try to raise money or where I, set aside time every single day. It'll be like hack on it in the free time when I want to, because it's a fun thing to do to get my head out of the writing space a little bit. But like to add on to that, the failure mode there is it becoming popular. Because if I woke up tomorrow and there were 100,000 people signed up for it and it was making $500,000 a month, it'd be really hard for me to say like, I should keep focusing on writing. Like I'd be really tempted to go work on the app more because it's like, now there's this pile of money over here. And so I would have to be pretty diligent about not letting it creep in if for some reason it like takes off unexpectedly.
I have a couple of questions. One that comes to mind, though, is you said that you spent 2 years getting better at writing to write this book. What was practice for you during that period of time?
Yeah, I'm like one of the last authors who had to do it the old way, because when I started writing this, there was no ChatGPT, there was no Claude, right? There were none of the good AI tools to help you with getting better at writing. And so I was basically reading writing textbooks. I knew that what I was good at were these 1,500 to 2,500 word, like how to explainer posts and newsletters and tweets. But that style doesn't give you a page turning, exciting narrative, right? It's a completely different writing style. So I kind of had to like learn from the ground up. And it was really just, writing a draft, looking at other books that I respected and wanted to emulate. And I actually focused more on fiction than nonfiction. I was reading kind of like thrillery fiction books or really fast-paced sci-fi fantasy books and trying to copy that style. Because I figured if I could nail that style, then people would get through the book, and nobody's going to recommend a book if they don't get through it. And so if I could get that part right, then it would be okay if like the explanations weren't perfect or the other little things, but it had to be fun to read. And it was really just like finish a draft, read some of these other books, try to figure out what that I'm doing isn't working in that sense, read books on writing to try to get better at those specific things, and then go apply it to the book for the next draft. So, in the first draft is just like a mess, but first drafts often are. And the big piece of feedback I got was that like the scenes, the little chunks of the story along the way didn't really make sense, or they didn't fit that well. There wasn't strong cohesion between them. They didn't have the typical aspects of a scene in a story of, like a clear protagonist with a clear goal and a clear opposition to that goal and a clear, resolution with a twist at the end of the scene. That's sort of like the basic structure. And so I read books on structuring scenes, and then I literally mapped out every single scene in the book. And I said, like, this is the main character. This is what they were trying to do in this scene. This is what's getting in their way. This is how it can resolve or this is how it resolves in the most interesting way. And this is how it feeds into the next scene. And I basically had like bullet points for every single scene of the book, mapping like all of that out to get the structure as good as possible. And I was like, okay, cool. I feel like I've got that part down, but now it's still a little slow and boring. So I started reading books on like conflict and suspense and tension and all of the things that make thrillers or beach reads really compelling to go through. And I was like, all right, how do I tweak my dialogue? How do I tweak my description? How do I, do really good cliffhangers at the end of chapters so people want to go to the next one? And like that was in the second and third draft. I was getting better at that. And then as I got into the fourth draft, I said, okay, well, now I have this problem of like how rich the scenes are, how much description there is, how much environment there is, how much interiority and like my emotions are into it. And to be honest, I probably only got like halfway through making all of those improvements. If I went and I edited it again, that part of the book would be better, but it was still good. It was like at some point you just have to say like, it's good enough, right? Like it's good. You have to say like, I'm done at some point, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. And if I was doing it today, there'd be a little bit more of that because I've gotten better at that in the meantime. And so it's just this iterative process of like, which of these core components of good storytelling are you weakest at? What can you study to get better at it? What are the like tricks and tools you can apply? And then how can you slowly make it more natural for you as you get more of those reps in? And this is like 10 times easier and 10 times faster to do with AI tools now, which has been an incredible unlock for like leveling up my writing skills even faster than I was able to do in the year and a half before these tools came online.
Incredible answer. It's like listening to one of your blog posts. And I think that's what's so interesting about you is just I don't want to say first principles, because that's like it's a first principles approach to learning.
Like podcast bingo is kind of
yeah.
First principles, right?
There's just certain things we try not to, like athletic.
First principles has jumped the shark. It was really cool as like a word 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's too many people are using it.
Overton window of podcast bingo.
I don't want to insult you by saying first.
No. Yeah, it was very foundations. It's like, figure, and I mean, this is what made a lot of Tim Ferriss's early work so good, is that he would take a skill and figure out what are the component parts of that skill, and then how do you very deliberately get better at each of those things. And figuring out what that was for writing and storytelling and writing a book like this was essential for getting better. And it created a very powerful learning process. Like, I'm really, really proud of, if you read the first draft, which like 2 people did, I didn't even let that out really. And then compare that to the final draft, it's like 2 different people. I just got so much better in that time period through this incredibly deliberate process of trying to get better at each of the component parts. And, I'm excited to see where that takes me in 10 years or 20 years, right? Like hopefully it can just keep getting stronger as I keep running that flywheel.
Do you, this question is going to come off a little harsh. Do you think that this book is worth outliving you? In your Substack, you say that... That's
a great question.
You say that your life goal is to write things that are worth outliving you.
Yeah. So that question is really important, because we had to ask a version of that question when I was planning the book with my editor and my agent, because crypto is such a nascent industry. Everything is going to, Bitcoin's going to be the same in a few years, but everything outside of Bitcoin is going to be totally different in 5 years, right? Like ETH will still probably be a thing, Solana will be a thing, but the way people are using it will be different. The terminology will be different. It'll be embedded in our lives in different ways. And so if it was a like, what is ETH, what is Bitcoin, how to crypto book, it wouldn't last more than a couple of years. It would just die off really quickly. But and I think there's a very high probability of this, crypto becomes a major part of the infrastructure of our lives in the same way that the internet is, or like HTTPS are, there will probably be interest in reading what it was like to be in the industry at the very beginning. And this is one of the first books about like not Brian Armstrong, just like a normal person who dived in and got kind of caught in the maelstrom and had an interesting story to come out of it that touches on a lot of the like good and bad of crypto during this period. So, I mean, a good analogy is like Michael Lewis's first book, Liar's Poker, which is about Salomon Brothers in the 80s and the junk bond market and all of that. And like that market's dead. Salomon Brothers is dead. But that story is still interesting because that was an important part of the financial world that's come after it. And so, will it still be being read after I'm dead? Probably not. I mean, maybe a few people who are, hopefully I publish enough books that I'm like an interesting author and people want to go read the first book. But it laid the foundation to eventually be able to write a book that could, right? Because I'm focused even more on fiction writing now. And if you write like an incredible sci-fi novel, Like, Dune has been made into a movie 3 times and Frank Herbert's dead, right? And people are still reading it and still talking about it. Michael Crichton with Jurassic Park, they're still making movies out of that IP, right? Like those stories can live a really long time. If I write a good enough philosophy book, that could live, because that's kind of the only type of nonfiction that lasts very long. Or I guess a really excellent history, but I'm not a historian. I'm not going to write a history book. So, more than anything, it's like, yes, I think this will last longer than how long a How to Crypto book would last. But even if it's not something people are still reading in 20, 30 years, it got me a lot closer to the book that they will.
I think in the ways that are within your control, you did what you could. It's totally. Some of it is the market. It's just like how technology unfolds. I don't know. I'm thinking like a metaphor here. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the thing too is like I did take a pretty big risk with trying to do this, because when I sold the book, it was October of 2022, which is like shortly after ETH hit $800 and was a month before all of the SBF FTX stuff happened. So it was like crypto might actually be done, guys. Like people were really, really down on it, which obviously made it a hard book to sell. And the whole premise of the book was that crypto's not dead, it's coming back, and there's going to be, more crazy stuff and good stuff. And like, here's how to sift through the chaos. And so the fact that it's now coming back as we're starting another bull run, as the Bitcoin ETF has been approved, the ETH ETF might be coming out like this week or next week. It could come out like the day the book launches. I mean, just the way the timing worked out could not be more incredible. But that was, it was kind of a gamble. But this was like the story that I had that could give me that break into publishing. And now I'm in. And, hopefully this book is going to do well, and I'm, going to have a lot of books after this. And it like got my whole career going. And I happen to be like super proud of it. Like I'm super happy with how it came out. I try not to like bank on this. I try not to let myself imagine it too much, but it could be a really big bestseller over the next year and a half if crypto really, really comes back in a big way. And that's super exciting to think about when I let myself imagine that possibility.
No, I think, for people listening to this, that was kind of anytime I read like a crypto book or any like, let's call it still at this day and age, like a niche topic or something. I'm like, I think if I asked my mom to read this, she would succeed. And I think that was, there was the right, just all the ratios of like the actual writings. Like I think a lot about The Third Door, if you've read that book. As being
I know the premise. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. In terms of writing, that's another kind of classically a book where myself and Kyle have referred it to maybe 10 to 20 people, and we get at least a 50 to 75% rate of people saying they read it in a day or like a 3-day period. Again, both myself and Kyle were time constraints between when we scheduled this interview and decided we wanted to finish it on time. But I mean, the momentum wasn't something I had to build because of that urgency by any stretch.
I totally agree. That's exactly the way that I felt, Lewis. Was like Third Door energy. I read it in 3 sessions just on my iPhone, just like clicking, like wanting to get into Kindle.
It. So that was a major disadvantage. Was like we were using this like unapproved. I don't know. I don't mean to hate on the guys, the developers of the app.
No, it's not a great app, and they know it's not a great app too. So you're not. No, and it's really funny that you mentioned like would my mom enjoy it and get through it, because that was actually one of the questions that I was thinking about while reading it. Was like, could you give this to a parent or a grandparent or a cousin or whoever who knows nothing about crypto and have them still enjoy it? And I've had a few friends now who got early copies who then gave their early copy to one of their parents, and like they have gotten through it. And that to me is, it's like, I love hearing that people in crypto enjoy it or that people in tech enjoy it. Like that means a lot to me too, but it means even more to me if somebody who has zero interest in crypto enjoys it and learns something from it, because that's like the real success for me with trying to do it this way.
Yeah, that's what gets you on an airport.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally.
Exactly. I was going to say, just go for it, Kyle. Actually,
one thing that like I really liked in the book was, is it Cosette? How do you say your wife's name?
Yeah, Cosette.
Cosette. Yeah. Cosette was just this voice of reason that I feel like all men can relate to with the women in their lives. And I related to it really well. It's like, this is how like she sees me a lot of the time. She's your support system, but she's also in it with you. And like,
Yeah.
are you sure that this like picture of a monkey is this all good? Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
I don't really have a specific question, but I just thought that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to the women in their lives and the way that they support them, even with a topic of crypto that a lot of people won't be able to relate to, in the sense, there's just a lot of things in the book that I think speak to human nature and to just life in general that are not about crypto. And I found that to be really, I don't know, I was proud of you in a way, and reading the book, just being a fan of yours. We never met, but I think that there's a lot to be gleaned from this book that's not just crypto.
Yeah, and I thought that was really important to highlight too, because obviously I could have put less of our relationship in the book. There's a couple of like really rough parts of the book that were, very hard to write. I was literally writing one of the chapters in a coffee shop and just like started sobbing and had to like run home because it was just so hard to get through writing those parts. And, and she read through some of the later chapters once and then was kind of like, she's like, I can't be back in that headspace, She was very supportive of including it and putting it out there, and like wanted it out there for the reason you said, that it's important for people to think about, how this stuff ends up affecting their relationships. And I mean, I don't know if you guys saw this as much, but we had a lot of friends who went through similar relationship dynamics during that period. And it's like, this isn't that controversial to say, crypto's been a very male dominated industry, especially on the speculative gambling side. And there are a lot of wives and girlfriends who had no idea what was going on and who just like felt the tension during that period. And I think writing something that could appeal to that side of the interest was important. And I think it was important to like let a lot of other men and women know that they weren't alone in feeling those things during that time, right? Like a lot of other people were going through the same struggles and, could hopefully come out of it together stronger.
No, I think you nailed it there. And I think that's what Kyle had mentioned a second ago with the way the book describes human nature. But I was kind of, somewhat, I don't know if I was skeptical or had some impression like, oh, this is going to be Nat telling Nat's story about this period of Nat's life. Well, that's just kind of the last impression I got, was like, oh, this is just one, like you said, it's not, okay, here's now Brian Armstrong, who's worth billions and can't relate to him. This is a lot more of a kind of everyday couple who. But
for me and Lewis, it wasn't like that, because we're like I know this random Twitter guy, we can't get enough of him. And then it's
turned into an everyday couple.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like one thing, I have the next page of this notebook is just reflections on the podcast, because Kyle and I are doing that episode right after this.
Cool.
And one of the things at the top of the list was just people are just people. And
people are just people.
I think you were the final boss. Like every time you just like have that realization of just like meeting someone, and you're like, then you like get out of the idea in your head. I'm not going to say where, but I like ran into David Goggins the other day in person. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, had a regular interaction with him. I was like, I don't know how many more final bosses there can have. It's like Nat Eliason's the Day One podcast guest, David Goggins in person. It's like, if I can't learn that people are just people by now, I'm out of luck.
Yeah. It's really true. it's sort of like a classic saying, don't meet your heroes, right? Mm. Because they won't be heroes anymore. They're just people. Right. And it's, it goes back to like including all of the tough parts of the experience in the book too, is, you don't want to get this, you don't want to build up this imaginary person in your mind, right? Or this imaginary other life you could be living. It's like, everybody's living day to day a lot of similar things. Some people definitely have more, tension built in from their employees or their influence or whatever, but it's like a lot of the same fundamental human nature stuff going on behind it. And it can be nice to know that, everyone else is just people too.
I feel like I met you reading the book, which is like
that's a really high compliment. Thank you.
Thing. One thing that I want to ask you specifically about is you did not sell, you didn't dump on retail at this kind of climax moment where you're like, you walk outside, you're like, 3 Arrows Capital, you decide not to do it. And
Yeah.
I struggle personally with trying to over moralize like business and capitalism in general. It's like there's, to a certain extent, there are skeletons in every closet and everybody's got to make money, you know? And I come from a real estate background, and there's a lot of times where you don't tell the seller information that makes their property more valuable, but not telling them that is that's the thing that I do in my head is like, am I hurting them by not telling them this information? And not necessarily if you're representing them, obviously, but if you're buying something from someone. And so you kind of had this moment where you made this big decision. And I feel like you went with what I would call the moral route, even though I don't necessarily know if there was a moral route or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's no, it does. And it's tough because it's never like a black and white Disney story with a clear good and a clear evil, right? And it's like I was selling, a good number of tokens all the way through. And, that created its own headaches with people getting pissed at me for selling the amount that I was selling. And, and then in that moment where I could have sold just like at least 200 grand worth, probably more, right? Like just could have dumped it all right there and just tanked the token before other people could. It was kind of like, it's like, this is too far, like I feel fine doing the reasonable daily amounts that I've been doing. It's somewhat predictable, but like using inside information to do a huge aggressive dump before something else coming out, it just felt like that was another step too far. But it's like I could totally imagine somebody saying like, well, like these are my tokens, like I earned them, I got paid in them. And, I have this knowledge. Everybody else sees the charts going up. Everybody else, could be following 3 Arrows. Like, what's wrong with selling, right? Like, they're your tokens. You can sell them. And so I don't necessarily think that someone's like bad for doing that. You just kind of have to like decide where you're going to feel comfortable, like sleeping at night or telling your kids about it later or whatever it is. And so that was sort of the moment where I realized like, yeah, I don't want to be a VC, because I had looked into it. I'd started talking to a few firms and I was like, oh, maybe I do like try to be a 3 Arrows or try to like join one of these firms and go all in on this. And that was when I was like, nah, it's just not worth it. Like I wouldn't feel good about some of these decisions. And there were VC firms that made a lot of money during that time period, just getting early allocations and then dumping on retail once the token was out. And it's like, to some extent, everyone knows what game they're playing. They're all hoping for number go up, but there is, I think, a reasonable limit to it. But yeah, it's all in this like weird gray area, especially in crypto, where it's so PvP adversarial.
Yeah, I want to transition now these final 10 minutes to some more open-ended questions.
Yeah,
I feel like this is another kind of this book is all about like the very unique culture at this moment in time, and kind of a previous cycle was kind of the productivity cycle that you were like a big part of, at least again from our vantage point. Mm-hmm. So in prep for this, I went back into like Rome, because I don't like use it constantly, but that's what I was using, especially at the time I was following you, and looked at the unlinked references for your name, right? And like see the sync to read, like, the full stack, sync to readwise highlights with the unlinked references from your name. Yep. And I was like, and I kind of just went through this layer of articles that kind of represent various inflection points and like deep ideas that were incepted in my mind that were like, we're genuine. I don't know about turning points, but definitely like if there's a steering wheel, like shifts in the steering wheel and altering of the course. And I was like, the article you wrote about how to learn digital marketing in 6 months. Cause like I, recommend the book Traction to people all the time. Yeah. And it's because of that article that you read it, and then cool. I read the book and I was like, this is great. And then what's funny is I recommended that book to my business partner several years ago before we did business together. And he of course bought the other book. Get a grip on your business. Yeah.
Book.
And so now our whole business is like all EOS native. And like, I can trace all that back to like
Yeah.
you publishing that article. And there's just, a few more examples of this, the whole like GPA for skills thing. And that was a whole article that I remember having a big point in the like forget commitment, invest in something. And they're just all of these like titles that were just real shifts. And I don't know if there's a question out of this. I do have a question that's somewhat not tied to the monologue, which is, even how you present it on the landing page of your site now is, here, this is a link to my blog. It kind of feels like a different chapter of my life. And it represents, right, a decade of publishing. So this is a difficult question to answer, kind of asking you to group that as one kind of compartment of your life. But what do you feel you kind of hard disagree with or hard feel like you've matured out of? Maybe somewhat more philosophically than just like kind of the low hanging fruit, which is like the tools don't matter as much as we think they do. It's doing the work. But like what other kind of deep foundational things make you feel the need to compartmentalize this? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding a little bit of the nuance of the framing.
No,
That's discarded almost.
That's a really good question. And I think the answer at the end of the day is that for a long time, I was chasing getting a quick win in something where I had this very adversarial stance towards work, where it was like work is sort of the thing that you do to have money so that you can enjoy your real life. And so you should find a way to hack that system and get as much money as possible so that you can, go off and enjoy your life. You should try to get the passive income or, have the big course launch or invest in, shit coins or whatever, just so you can like get that quick win. And the crypto was really the culmination of it in the sense that like, and I had smaller wins along the way. I mean, like when I graduated from college, I launched this course with my friend and the course did like 50K in sales in a week or two. And, we were splitting that 50-50 and I was just a college kid with like no cost of living. And so that 25K was a year of runway for me. I mean, it was incredible. Right. And I was like, whoa, like I kind of like won this little game. And then I had, a couple courses that did super well. And I was like, oh, like I won this little game, but they were always these short-term goals. And even with the blog, so much stuff was write this article to try to get SEO reach so I can like get more traffic, so I can, drive people to these products and things, or so I can sell courses. And the reason I think I compartmentalize a lot of that away is I'm just fully focused now on this long-term game of writing and specifically writing books. It's like, that's just the thing that I care about and that I could keep caring about for 30, 40 years. And I just don't care about the productivity stuff very much anymore. I don't care about the, lifestyle business stuff anymore. I don't care about the SEO marketing stuff anymore. It's just like, those were all very useful phases of my life to lay some financial and audience foundation for me to get to do what I'm doing now. But what I want to focus on now is just like writing really, really good books. And that's a very long-term game. And to the extent that I'm doing stuff on my blog now, on like the Substack, the new blog, it's really just like testing out ideas and like playing with things, or, driving people to the books. And, I think that's been the biggest meta shift is like, oh, all these little phases along the way were short-term games. And now I've actually found a long-term game that I want to focus on. And that's not a bad way to use your 20s. Like, I think it's actually kind of an underrated way to use your 20s. Like, you should go quickly in a few different directions until you find the direction that you feel good about, but then you should fully commit to that direction and let the short-term games go and be willing to, I didn't make much money the last 2 years, going from the highs of crypto to doing no other paid work. I explicitly said, like, I'm not doing any freelance stuff. I'm not launching any courses. I'm not going to try to make money in some other way because that's going to be a distraction from the long-term game. And that's a really, really hard mindset shift to make, especially for me, who's had these short-term wins along the way. But I think that long-term, it pays off so much better. You get that really incredible compound interest of focusing on something for a long time. And that's just where so much more of my energy is going now. It's just like very long-term games with long-term people and not trying to play these like quick win ones anymore.
Is there a book that you're not going to write soon, but that you want to write at some point? Or that you think needs to be written?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to it. I'd like to do a more pure philosophy book at some point, something like a John Gray book, but I don't feel any urgency to do that because I could totally do it later. And I think in the near term, I'm thinking one about the fiction books I want to write, and I've just so many ideas there that it's overwhelming. And then on the nonfiction side, there are a number of ideas that have popped up multiple times along the way in blogging that I think would be really interesting and expanding into, a book form. And it's tough to figure out the right way to do that because, Crypto Confidential is so narrative driven and so experience driven. And I think that's what makes it so fun. And I might not have the same kind of linear story for some of these other topics, but, I still want to write about them. So that's going to be a bit of a shift. But those of us who use Readwise and read Substacks and listen to like businessy thought podcasts are an extremely small part of the total reading market. And the way most people get exposure to these ideas is through books. And so it is worth turning good ideas into book form. But then it's going to be a challenge of like, what's the best way for me to do this where I would feel good about it? Because I don't know that I would like to do a pop nonfiction style idea book. I'd have to find some way to make it pretty fun and interesting that would be a little like different and surprising. And so that it would be like a fun exercise because I don't want to just churn out books for a paycheck. Even if it would be a good one, like I want to find ways to keep pushing myself and keep trying new things and keep learning. But
just put the
I don't
F
have
word on
like
the cover.
Yeah.
Things that'll continue to work forever.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I know we only have a couple more minutes. What would your philosophy book be about, or what would you draw on? What if you were to tell me to go and learn some philosophy? What book would you tell me to go read?
That's a good question. The one that I would like to do if I were going to do one in the nearer term would be like a quasi pop epistemology book, because we have a lot of like ethics books. Ryan Holiday is sort of like the pro here, where he's taken a lot of like philosophy of ethics, ethics being broadly how to live, right? Like not necessarily right and wrong, but like how to behave in the world. And I love those topics too. I'd love to do an ethics related book at one point, but I actually think there's an interesting opportunity to do an epistemology book at this point in time, because we're going through this period of not having good tools to know what to believe and what to think, because a lot of the old tools have kind of broken down, and particularly around our relationship with science and truth and authority. And we're kind of like stuck with these two poles where you've got one side that's, like trust the experts, like listen to the people in government or in lab coats or whatever, like they'll never lie to you. They've got your best interest at heart. And it's like, okay, we know that's not true, but ignoring all of it is also not a good solution, because like there is a lot of good truth over there and useful things. You just can't download it wholesale. And so how do you seek truth and build justifiable beliefs in a world of infinite noise? And that's a really hard question. And versions of it have been talked about since, the beginning of philosophy, really. There's a lot of interesting, epistemology, or it's like, obviously you can start with Descartes, you've got Nozick, all the way back in like the ancients, you've got experience with this, and you've got more modern ones. I mean, it's like a lot of the AI stuff got some of its start in epistemology and philosophy of mind, which are really interesting topics of like, what is the relationship between consciousness and biology? And like, can we ever know that? And like, what does it mean to be human and thinking? And, how do you feel like you can be confident in your beliefs in a world that feels endlessly confusing? I feel like there's something there. And I wrote this article titled Leaving the Church of Science, which would be kind of an interesting foundation to like start off of, but I don't know when I would pursue that. Although I do feel like if I want to do it, I should do it soon, because it's kind of like in the gestalt right now, right? Like it's a topic people are interested in. But there's a lot of imposter syndrome around writing pure philosophy, right? It's like, who am I to be doing that? So that's the first one that comes to mind, though.
And who are any of the others as well, is with philosophy specifically?
Like who?
I'm saying like who had some crazy quality, like philosophy is kind of.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah. Like there's a lot of the best comes from. I mean, there are good professors and stuff in more recent philosophy, but yeah, a lot of it is just like people who were just interested in thinking and going for a lot of walks and coming up with ideas too. And
exactly.
Their ideas.
And that's the whole thing too. You said it right there. Is like, there's these credentialed people, and well, what does the credentials matter? And it's kind of the whole. It's an instant. I'm sold, and I've thought I was spending your whole time thinking about if there was a book in the market that does address this gap, kind of in the modern sense, and I didn't go on the internet to look at it, but
there's not a great one out there.
It's a real problem. It's a real tension right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that would be a tough needle to thread between the two extremes, because it'd be easy to get discarded by leaning too far in either direction, but you also might not make anybody happy by not picking a side. And so it's like, does it have commercial interest if it's in the middle? And I think it would. I think there is actually a very large middle that is just like checked out from the discourse because they don't care about the arguments anymore. And they're like waiting for society to calm down before they pick their head up. And so there could be an opportunity to like tap that interest, but it'd be a pretty challenging book to do well.
Yeah, there's some scoping around who this book would be for. Yeah, that would make it difficult to like. That's with all books. It's like, who do you want to just have the only other people who understand this appreciate it, or do you want to water it down and make it mass appeal? But we're in a dangerous conversation towards the end here, getting into like how we would write a philosophy book about truth. That's gonna be. We got to just can that to cut it there.
The nice thing is I was just gonna say, the nice thing with it is that there's no pressure because nobody's ever solved any of these problems. And so if you don't solve them, it's like, oh, that's fine. You just have to say something interesting about it.
Yeah. I was saying a book with was a lot less confusing and a much more clear pitch and value as to why you'd read it. I mean, first of all, you'll just enjoy it and also see yourself in it in a lot of things. It's going to be everywhere, right? July 9th, I can tell you this one podcast will not be out by July 9th. I got to get my editing put together. So the book will be out. It'll be in all the places, maybe even at airports. I don't know.
Hope so. That would be cool. That'd be really cool.
And it's written by written by the coolest guy ever. So
thanks, guys.
Yeah. And then Nat, you're still active on the internet for the time being.
Yep. Twitter is where I'll be most responsive. So just at Nat Eliason there. And this is a real honor, guys. This was really, really fun. And it means a lot that my stuff has been useful to you guys over the years. And it means a lot that you enjoyed the book. So I'm glad we got to the chance to hang for this last interview episode.
Means a lot to us, man.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.